took your time.
You're great. You did fine. All right. Thank you, everybody, for staying till the end. I'm acutely aware I'm standing between you and lunch and going home. So I hope you had a good time while you're here. I hope you got lots of information. It's quite impressive what the two universities are actually doing internally as far as supporting agriculture, so I hope you appreciate that. I was challenged to just briefly speak about what's happening within the Appendix N committee and within the pasteurized milk ordinance for changes that are going to be occurring here in the next year or so. So at this point in time, I represent the veterinary community at the at the National Conference of Interstate Milk Shipments, which is essentially the group that writes the pasteurized milk ordinance. Paul Rapnicki was in this role prior to me taking it over a couple of committee meetings or a couple of conferences ago. So next month I get to go spend a illustrious week in Grand Rapids, Michigan, being the only veterinarian in an entire conference. It's the most weird thing I ever do, with a bunch of regulators. So within that, I sit on the Appendix N committee, and that's the group that regulates all the drug residue testing that occurs within the industry. And as you look at that, you'll quickly realize that there's not a single veterinarian on there with the exception of me. So if you have some burning desires to talk about drug residue testing and influence in the going forward, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Many of these people have very little concept of how things really happen on the farm, and I spend a lot of time defending things like extra label drug use and whatnot, and the need to continue to do that. So appreciate that there's quite a bit of call, some vocal call for extra label drug use to go away, especially when we have surveys that show up things like chlorphenicol and ciprofloxacin in milk surveys that really don't help my cause or our cause in general. So the Appendix N committee is made up of a group of processing representatives, state representatives, one veterinarian. We have representation from the FDA, and then also representation from all the kit manufacturing groups that are currently making any type of kit that's being used for milk residue testing. A couple of years ago, we passed Proposal 211, which essentially said that we were going to have a more extensive drug testing, more comprehensive drug testing protocol over the next several years. If you've ever worked within a regulatory organization, you quickly, or you haven't, you quickly become appreciative of how slow things move. And so we've been working on this essentially 2 years to get to the point of where we're going to start now having tetracycline testing beginning July 1 of this year. So that's the first drug that's been chosen. We were given the assignment to look at a group of drugs, including beta-lactams, but the fluorphenicols, NSAIDs, sulfonamides, macrolides, tetracycline family, aminoglycosides, and the avermectins were the choices of drug families, classes, whatever you want to say, that we were tasked to choose from and go forward for a couple of reasons. Number one, testing methodology that's currently available, and the number of samples and whatnot that can be collected. The ability to test for some of these products, for example, to test for avermectins, we would need to have ether extraction and a flame hood and all this stuff in these labs, and that's just not realistic. So the tetracycline group is going to start, as I said, July 1. The FDA has proposed that we could reduce beta-lactam testing, but at this point there's no interest in doing that within the PMO, and mostly from the processors, because of potentials for withdrawals, or the potentials for some drug getting through and having to do a recall, not a withdrawal, a recall of product. Okay, so we will have this program starting July 1. It's a tetracycline class of drugs. So the three most common animal tetracyclines, oxytetracycline, tetracycline, and chlorotetracyclines. The tetracycline family has a unique tolerance. We got to get Gerard to stop saying MRL. He'll stop using kilograms someday too, but you know. So the tolerance is the U.S. legal standard. In that it's a combined tolerance of 300 parts per million. So the tests have to be able to detect and be additive to that 300 level. The program is to pick out one tanker out of 15 tankers in some mechanism over a period of time to be able to get 1 in 15 tankers surveyed for tetracyclines. If we start doing sulfonamides in the future, that'll be 1 in 7. And then essentially what this is going to have is it's going to be at least a minimum of, it's a pilot program. So the executive board of NCIMS just approved this last week, and they're emphasizing that they want most states to do this. They want it to be as many processors as possible, as many states as possible. So it gets down to the individual state level. So in Iowa, we can't adopt anything that's not a full resolution published in the PMO. So in Iowa, it's going to be at the processor level for them to decide. And I'm not certain what Minnesota is going to be doing as far as if it's going to be for the processors to voluntarily comply or not. So at this point in time, we have one test that was been approved prior to this being in place called the CHARM-2, which is a fairly complicated test to run. It's not necessarily the most user-friendly test, and they just approved the CHARM-SL test. So the CHARM-ROSA equipment now has a tetracycline strip that's been approved by the FDA and NCIMS. Okay. So what's that mean going forward? As far as the on-label uses, the only on-label tetracycline for cows, I believe, is LA200. It's got a milk withdrawal. There's not going to be an issue there. But the extra label things are going to get us into potential conversations, both intrauterine and topical, and Gerard mentioned that just a little bit ago. Some of his work would suggest that we can find it if we look, but probably at low enough levels that it would be really difficult to trigger a test at 300 parts per billion. And this is some recommendations that you've maybe seen on ABPL or other places to keep it down to a fairly low level and try to maybe not treat more than 20% of the animals that might make up a batch. And as Gerard said, FARAD now is recommending a 24-hour milk withhold if you do use topical tetracycline for hairy heel warts. There's a lot of politics that went into that decision. It may not be based on the best science, but that's what they're recommending. So you, as the veterinarian, have to decide how you're going to apply that going forward if you are going to utilize this practice of extra label drug use. So I'd be more than willing to talk to you about that, about how to do some calculations or maybe do some testing and whatnot to try to decide where you want to go. We have had a couple of veterinarians submit milk samples from bulk tank on herds that did tetracycline in the foot bath, and those have both came up non-detectable. I really don't think there's any risk there, but that's on a very small N of 2. But they would have to consume that to really actually drink the foot bath to really be of any issue there. And so this is the sensitivities for the ROSA kit that just got approved. So even though the tolerance is 300 parts per billion, the test kits have to be able to detect at or below that. Okay, so if you're going to do a calculation on a client farm and use some data and try to come up with your own withdrawal times, I think you need to use the numbers that are published here for the sensitivity of the individual tests. Because this is a test kit that was originally approved for export of milk into other countries that have a much lower tolerance for tetracycline than we do here in the United States, this kit was actually gone through a process of developing a dilution step. So in the surveys that the processing plants will be doing, they'll be running all these samples at an undiluted level first, and if they have a positive on the undiluted sample, they have to go through the dilution step, okay? And so that increases the sensitivity level where it cuts off as positive. So this is an important conversation, important piece to understand is that while the protocol says they're supposed to go through the dilution step and the requirements are that they're supposed to go through the dilution step, I think there's going to be some movement of milk that may be altered based on a positive test on an undiluted sample. It won't be it won't be legal according to the process, but if you don't own the milk, you can make all the rules you want, apparently. So going forward, if you start having some conversations with clients about tetracycline popping up, you might want to make sure that they're running the full dilution steps on these. But if you want to calculate your own withdrawal times, it's pretty simple to do, actually, if you know what the levels would be coming off the treatments. One recommendation that I would make is if you're going to use any of the tetracycline products for hairy heel warts, I'd probably stay away from the straight tetracycline product. Use oxytetracycline, which is the more commonly used product, or chlorotetracycline, because the test kits, both the ROSA kit and it looks like the IDEX kit, are going to be hypersensitive to the tetracycline molecule compared to the other two. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, we can ask them afterwards, or I can talk to you after the meeting's over. So looking forward to the 2017 meeting next month in Grand Rapids, there are 98 total proposals to be looked at. There are 9 that impact us in this room. 8 of those are in Appendix N. The majority of those are looking at clarifying the logistics of milk testing. There's a proposal to increase the testing of tetracyclines to every tanker just to make it easier instead of having to do 1 in 15. There's a proposal to expand the testing to all drugs, including sulfonamides and other residues. And then some approvals for some new test kits going forward also. There's also within Council 1, which is another committee from where Appendix N is to, again, lower the Semitic cell count to 400,000. This has been proposed almost every conference since at least 2000. And I think this has a snowball's chance in hell of passing. To put it bluntly, the regulators have really no interest in regulating a lower Semitic cell count within the FDA. And they keep using the excuse of this is a public health document and this is not a public health concern. So while there will be a proposal, while the veterinary community and National Mastitis Council will support its passage, it probably will not be passed through the PMO. Probably not too surprising. With that, that's all I have. I would entertain any questions, or I can certainly talk to anybody afterwards. Thank you. I'm sorry, I heard starting July 1 and finding tetracycline.
Would farmers potentially have to buy a tanker of milk if they found tetracycline on their farm?
Yeah, so essentially this will be the same program unless the state alters it, right? This will be the same program that would be in place if they had found a residue for, a violative residue for beta-lactams, okay? We have to get our heads around the fact that residues are present in all food compounds. Violative residues are what we're talking about here. So it would be the same process as the beta-lactam positive violative residue, right? So we go through the same testing protocol, and if there's a disposal, there may be or a penalty to pay.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for attending the conference. I think there's lunch served outside. And for those people that are attending the focus group, we're going to be in the